Welcome back to the Me and Money podcast. Elliott, how's it going today?
I'm doing well. You, Matt?
Yeah, hanging in there. I feel like it's the end of crazy season for us. So, you know,
Spring's here, flowers are blooming, and it's not frigid temperatures outside, so I'm better.
yeah, this is the kind of weather you like here in the Midwest.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, I know last time we talked about what a brokerage account is, how it functions. So if you missed that, feel free to go back and listen to that one before you listen to this episode. Because this time we're going to talk more about who they may be for and why they could be a good tool for your financial plan. So why don't you kick us off, Elliott? I guess what are some of the use cases, either personally or maybe of your clients, that you've seen work really well for a brokerage account?
I think answering the larger question of who's it for, I think it could be for anybody potentially. It's one of those accounts, as we talked about last time, that provide a lot of flexibility. It can be used for a home down payment in 5 years. It could be for retirement in 50 years, retirement in 10 years. It could be intentioned for a grandchild or a child as a legacy or for heirs. There's a lot of use cases, and that's why I like it. It's can really be used for anything. Whereas you have some constraints around other different types of accounts. A brokerage is, I don't know, wild west in a way, but in a good way.
Yeah.
So I've used it. I mean, I use it personally for things that pop up. I've used it for house down payments in the past. I have a brokerage account just for kind of anything that happens. It helped provide flexibility when launching my firm. I imagine part of this will be used for retirement. And then obviously for clients, a lot of times it's just used for retirement withdrawals. So
Yeah.
Everyday living expenses even.
Yeah. I love that. And to your point, and you said it yourself, the wild west, right? And I think this is one of those things where, I spend a fair amount of time on personal finance Reddit. I sometimes just need a little entertainment, shall I say. And I think this is the one where when I see people talking about this account in a forum full of strangers, where I get kind of cringy a little bit and squeamish. Well, it's so fascinating how people on a website where all you know is that this person's name is person from Madison 2025, right? That people feel so liberated to tell them exactly how these accounts should be invested, right? And so you hit on it, and I love that you talked about different time horizons, right? Someone may be retiring in 10 years. Maybe they just want to use these funds in 15 years, but are still going to be working. Maybe they're retiring 40 years from now, and that's what they're going to use it for. And all of those answers are going to really have different prescriptions as to how this account should be invested. And that's where I see a lot of the Reddit folk saying, oh, you should put it all in the S&P 500. Like, well, if you're looking to buy a house with some of that money in the next 2 years, probably not inadequate.
I hope the market goes up for you.
Yeah, I sure hope so, right? And so that's where I think this is truly like the wild west account, right? A lot of different answers. You're going to get everything from people who just want to hold some cash in there, which totally okay if that's what you want to do. You can do that, to the Wall Street Bet Reddit page as well. Probably trading options and
options, yeah,
wild stuff right in there. So I think that's what's really unique about the account, though, too, is it can kind of be whatever you want it to be, and that's I think it's the most underspoken account that we work with. Most people don't even know what it is.
And I get disappointed a little bit by that, not for people not knowing what it is, but that there's not more education or awareness around it, right? I think a lot of people are taught, hey, save into your 401k, save into your 401k. And sometimes you meet people who did a great job saving into their 401k, almost too good. And then they don't have any flexibility in everyday life stuff. They're like, hey, all my money's my 401k. I want to buy a house now. Oops. Like there's no money for that. Or I want to take a sabbatical. I can't easily access that money without penalties. And so that's where I think getting into the habit of saving into this, if you're younger, or even if you're older at some point, but still working, even just regular contributions, I think, to a 401k and regularly investing that in a way that makes sense for you can be a really helpful thing just to get into the habit of building this other type of account.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think to just put a broad label on it, I think this is a very good account for anyone who wants to invest their money for it to grow in more than 5 years from now, but may not be that magical age of 59 and a half, 5 years from now. Right. So, and I've actually heard financial planners. I was just talking to a guy who started his firm and he's like, yeah, I did a really good job saving in my 401k, but I really wish I had a brokerage account right now. And it's, so we're not immune from it either. But yeah, I think that's a really good point that you make, Elliott.
Yeah. And I mean, I'll tell a short story because that has me thinking, like, for myself, I can contribute a little more to my 401k through after tax contributions if I'd like to, being self-employed. Or I could do more to the brokerage account. I'm actually starting to struggle with that decision of what sort of life things might be on the horizon that I would want more money in a brokerage account for that flexibility versus long-term savings. And like many financial decisions, I might just split it because I don't know.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good point, that we all sort of struggle with this, that there's limited dollars to be allocated in certain ways. How do we allocate that? And I think a brokerage account can be a component of that for everything that happens between now and 59 and a half.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, to speak on that, I think that's a really good segue, Elliott, into maybe sometimes we don't know like the timeline for when this account or when our money in general is going to be used. And I think that's, again, going back to maybe picking on Reddit a little bit, and just throwing everything into a super aggressive investment allocation. Typically when I'm having this conversation with my clients, it really does depend on how much they're investing into this account. But if you're just getting started and you're not sure when you're going to be using this, I would strongly consider using like a much less aggressive. So maybe if you're, investing those retirement dollars at like a 75-25, so 75% stock, 25% bond, or even more aggressive than that, like maybe something closer to 50-50. I'm not saying 50-50 is the answer for you, but, just remember that you need to have some stable positions in that account if you were to need to take money from it. So that as we're recording this, right, where the market has been going left, right, upside down, all over the place. 10% swings in the matter of
A
a
day.
few days. Yeah. That can be very unsettling if you're planning on using that money at any point in the near future. And so I think you owe it to yourself to not put that stress on yourself if you do need to use that money. So again, it's not a recommendation of how aggressive you should be, but I think that's something that you should strongly consider, where if you do have some reason to believe that you're going to need that money at some point in the next 5 years, it's probably best to give up some of that return and just accept that.
And I would also add that if you pick the wrong allocation at some point, and I don't know what wrong is, but let's say one that you're uncomfortable with or doesn't match the time frame any longer, you can adjust it. You just may have to deal with some tax consequences for it. So I'll give the example that I tend to be 100% stocks in my brokerage account because I'm really thinking about this as a 20, 30 plus year horizon. But there's been times in my life where I've needed some funds for a house or business expenses or something like that at some point where my need changed suddenly. So I adjusted that to something more conservative for a portion of that to match the time frame where some of it was still aggressively invested. So I think that's important to keep in mind, that as life changes, your investment allocation can change for this account, much like a 401k hopefully is probably doing the same.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, it's just one of those things where, sometimes you do need to make those changes and the taxes suck. Like I kind of ran into that last year when I thought about buying, a portion of someone's practice, and I can't really use my retirement dollars for that. So I had not planned on that opportunity coming up, and I did generate some cash to like help facilitate that. It ultimately ended up not happening, and so I paid taxes for nothing. But you know that's part of the price you pay.
Yep.
And at the end of the day, taxes aren't the worst thing. Like, sure, no one likes paying them, and we try to pay as little as we can. However, don't let taxes get in the way of setting yourself up to do the things that you want to do or need to do. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of other, interesting use cases for these accounts. I think again, Elliot, when we really go back to like who are these for, like they're great to have. Like, do you have any thoughts around like, should you only be doing this if you're getting the match on your 401k? Like, I don't know. It's an interesting conversation, but what are your general thoughts there?
Larger than life questions, Matt. I don't even know if I can put a cohesive thought together to answer that, to be honest with you, because it's so, I mean, it's the typical financial planner answer. It depends. And
Yeah.
I hate having that cop out answer, but it really, like, if you can't pay your bills, the brokerage account is it for you. I can say that pretty confidently. Uh, but past that point, like above and beyond a match, maybe not. It depends on when you might need funds. Like I like the idea of contributing more to a 401k, but I don't necessarily like that if you're like, hey, a house is a really important purchase to me and I plan on doing that in 7 years. Well, then maybe it's more towards the brokerage account, or I want to leave some money for my child's not necessarily education, but for them to go take a sabbatical year or enjoy after college or something like that, a gap year. Um, maybe that life thing is worthwhile to forego some extra 401k savings. So I don't have a good answer for you, unfortunately. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts.
Well, good. I'm glad because I didn't have a good one either. I figured I'd throw it on you. I think my biggest thing, and this is kind of my answer with anything saving or investing. I think it really comes down to like, have you done the basics first, right? And I kind of threw you a trick question, right? Because I led with the 401k, I left out emergency fund and all that stuff. But, it's one of those things where I really do see sometimes people feel the pressure that they have to be investing or they should be doing this. And sure, maybe you should. But, if you can't do this consistently and it's not something you can commit to and like have as part of your monthly income plan, your income and spending plan, I do think it can create more problems than it does benefit. And that's really because if you're an overspender or you don't have that emergency fund and you needed to pull from it, it really does disrupt that compounding effect. And you may have to deal with taxes and you may be experiencing market volatility like we are now. So I think for me, like consistency is really the key. And that's where, again, if you have that emergency fund and something happens, you have the cash buffer to protect you from going to the brokerage account first. It's also going to help you, buy things over time and kind of even out your cost basis, or at least give you different things to pull from so that maybe you don't need to realize a ton of taxes all at once, but instead little pieces here and there. I guess my only exception to that rule is if you do receive something like a large inheritance or a meaningful inheritance, and you can use that to establish an emergency fund, and what you're spending. I'm not saying like go throw it all into the market, but that can just be something where if you do receive a life-changing amount of money and you can't put those dollars necessarily into your IRA or Roth IRA, it can be a really good option for those people too.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Anything else? I have one more that maybe is a little bit less talked about as well.
Yeah, love to hear it.
Yeah, so I think you may have said it, Elliot, but I think college education is also a really good, goal to fund with this, especially if you're in a state with no income taxes and therefore no income tax benefit on the state side for like something like a 529. Sure, you can get the tax deferred or tax free gain on that through the 529, but sometimes parents don't necessarily know or want to commit to just funding their child's education. Sometimes the question is, well, or the answer to the question of if they want to fund it or not is, I'll do it if I can. And this can be a really nice way to have access to that money and not be worried about. I mean, again, you're just going to pay the capital gains or the gains on that 529 anyways. But sometimes it can just be a less intimidating way to save for college. And if I can afford it at the time, I'll just take from that and pay the taxes and give them what they need. Or I won't, and I'll just use it for whatever I want.
Or
Right.
retirement.
Or
Yeah.
retirement. And I think too, it also gives opportunities to fund your child's life in different ways. I've seen parents, maybe they don't necessarily believe in funding the whole college education, but they want to pay for something like a down payment on a house. And this will let you do that. And it's just a less restrictive way of saving your money. And if you had a disaster between when they're born and you start saving in that 529 and when they turn 18, you can just take it and not have to deal with it. So I think that's just another underspoken about way of using these accounts.
Definitely. That is one that I've seen come up many times.
Yeah. Well, anything else on this one, Elliott? I think we
I
covered a
just
lot of the
want to
basics.
reiterate and stress I love this account for the financial flexibility, and just it can be used for anything in life. Some people, I'm not going to swear here, but some people use it as FU money, if you will, and that it'll allow them to do some things that they didn't necessarily know that they could do or feel comfortable doing. So, big fan of brokerage accounts.
Well, and one thing we also didn't talk about, and not to open a whole different can of worms, maybe we'll get into that in the estate planning conversation, but these can also be really good accounts to leave a legacy with, right?
Yeah, great step up in cost basis in many situations where, let's say you paid $100,000 into an account and it's worth $1 million today, and you go to die. If it's titled in a certain way, your heir's new cost basis might be $1 million, in which case there wouldn't be any taxes to selling. So it's a great leave on asset for the next generation to do things with.
I love how you said, and you go to die. Like, is that?
I guess there's different ways to die. I don't know.
I'm just going to go to die today at the store or something. I don't know. I just thought that was funny, but yeah, there's some really nice, charitable benefits to not pay those taxes, which, is kind of like, it's kind of like the Roth IRA for charitable giving in that sense, right? Where sure, you can't just use it for anything, but it is kind of like the Roth IRA equivalent of a charitable account, right? Where you put those after-tax dollars in, they grow, and then the charity doesn't pay tax on them. So,
yeah. I mean, I guess the other thing, while we're on the topic of death and here anyway, it's also, typically, depending on your investments in there, it's a fairly typical, or I should say, fairly liquid account to pay anything that needs to happen at the end of life that isn't going to incur a huge tax bill. And what I mean by that is, if all you have is pre-tax money in an IRA or a 401k, and you actually need to distribute that money to then pay for funeral, prepping a house, estate taxes, if you're in a state with a low estate tax exemption like Oregon or Washington, side of the country that I'm originally from, and you can only pull from that can be problematic, whereas a brokerage account can be very flexible and fairly minimal taxes to be able to pay those estate taxes or other things that you have to pay quickly within, like estate taxes, for example, within 9 months of death. So again, flexibility here is the key.
Yeah. And I think we'll save titling and beneficiaries on those accounts for estate planning conversations, but yeah, definitely some things to think about there, but it can, like you said, give a lot of access, especially to a spouse. If it's like a joint account, right, it can eliminate a lot of the headache of getting access to assets upon the first death. So yeah, well, I think that's a good place to leave it. We'll come back with estate planning another time, and boy, do we have some things to teach in those ones. So
it'll be a good one.
That's what we'll leave it for now, but it was good to chat with you, Elliott.
Likewise, Matt.